I'll talk about the oldest archaeological works and the oldest museum in Mesopotamia. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this subject is because chemistry is a bit related with this subject. Now, if you recall from the previous lectures, we talked about Queen Puabi when we talked about gold. And the archaeologists were excavating Ur and the palace, and they discovered the tomb of Queen Puabi and all the other royalty people. And this lecture is about the same area, the same person. When he continued to digging, after he discovered Queen Puabi, he also made an important discovery. He discovered the first museum in the world in the same place. And he also discovered that the king at that time was the first archaeologist in the world. We are talking about 500 BC. And also, if you recall the lecture when we talked about the distillation apparatus, extraction apparatus, and the separator funnels used by the Sumerians, which were made out of clay, big pots. And those apparatuses, extraction, sublimation, distillation, and separator funnels, etc., were also found in Mesopotamia. Not, I should say, exactly Mesopotamia, but partly Mesopotamia, North Mesopotamia, not Ur or Uruk or Babylonia, but it was just in the south of Hakkari, the southern cities of Turkey, just northern Mesopotamia. And if you recall, they were dated 3500 BC. So archaeology and history of chemistry are related, and also archaeology and museums are not new inventions of the modern times. In the old days, thousands of years ago, people were interested in the history of their land or humanity. Okay, now let's see. Now, when we talk about archaeology, it comes from Greek language. They have a word, archaeus. In Turkish, we also archaic. We say archaeus means ancient, very old. Ancient is very old. Now, in archaeology, they study the civilizations in the past. And they, of course, you can only study or analyze how they lived and what they did by looking at the physical objects, which we call artifacts. Artifacts are movable pieces left from the ancient people. Now, these objects which are created by them or modified by them or used by them as they were. So when we excavate the land that we are interested in, find the objects, we can understand how they lived, just like the distillation apparatus. When we discover a distillation apparatus 5,500 years ago, so we know that they had something to do with chemistry. They were doing distillation, they were doing extraction. Or when we find a clay tablet related to medicine, we know that the doctors use these materials as medicine for curing the people. Now, we analyze the small pieces, the bones of the people, some clay tablets, some rocks which are carved, and also we can understand the style of their living and level of their civilization by looking at the settlements. When we say settlements, we are talking about the cities, villages, or the big buildings like pyramids, things like that. So the small things that we can handle are called artifacts. Those which are not small to handle, like pyramids, big houses, big palaces, we call them what do you call it? Features, yeah, we call them features. settlements, villages, pyramids, things like that, we call features. Now, when we analyze the people, we try to understand their daily life, the governing of the village or the city or the country. We try to learn about their kings or governors, whatever, how they dressed, how they eat, everything we try to understand from the materials that we received after the excavations. And of course, as the years pass, we have some new technologies, so we can learn much more details than we used to learn 100 years ago or 200 years ago, because we have now electronics and many different technologies. We can analyze the product, we can analyze their food remains, we can analyze their dresses by various chemical techniques, etc. So we now are in much better shape than earlier archaeologists to understand how the people lived, what they believed in, their religion, and what they valued, things like that. Now, there is this interesting story that in the old days, as you can see in many documents on the TVs and in some movies, that the pyramids are the tombs of the kings, pharaohs. And they were always buried with gold, silver, all the jewelry, and also their slaves, things like that. But the thieves, there were always thieves in the world. And they always try to rob the pyramids, and most of the pyramids are robbed. And not in the modern times, even soon after the kings died or the pharaohs died. Now, there's a story about the pyramid of Ramses I. We all know Ramses II, but Ramses I had ruled for a very short time. He's not very well known, but his name was Ramses. He was the first one. And his tomb or pyramid was robbed around 1800s. And they sold the mummies. In the old days, in Middle Ages, when I say old days, when they robbed a pyramid and then stole the mummy of the pharaoh or mummy of the people who lived with the pharaoh, were thought to be very valuable medicine. I don't know if I mentioned about it. And they broke the small pieces of the bodies, dead bodies of the pharaohs or the servants, whatever, because in the pyramid you also have the mummies of the other people, cats, dogs, whatever, animals, and also some servants. They broke the pieces of mummies and then sold them in Europe as medicine in Middle Ages. Because people said that if these people were very rich, very smart, perhaps their bodies contain something for us which will work as medicine and we will live longer. And they sold the pieces of bones, cloth, everything, all the remains from mummies. So it was not only to steal the golds, but later on they stole the mummies to sell small pieces of mummies as medicine. And the thieves sold it, and then after many years, you see, we are talking about 1800s. In 1999, only it was sold to a museum in Canada, Niagara Falls Museum, and it was only returned. The mummy of Ramses I returned to his tomb only in 1999. Sorry. Finally, it arrived there 2003, but it was found in the museum in 1999. Sorry. Now, you all know about Göbekli Tepe. It dates back to 12,000 years ago, and there are pillars, steles, and we have an idea. We are almost sure that that place was a temple. But we don't know the exact story behind it. This is just an estimation. So even after so many years, we don't know exactly what they were for. Because there is no written documents. So when we talk about archaeology, if we are lucky, we find some written documents just like Sumerians or partly Hittites. Now let's get back to the oldest archaeologist, whose name is Nabonidus. He was the king of Babylon in the south of Mesopotamia. Ur and Babylonia, they are about the same places. Sometimes the name changes. Actually, when we say Babylonia, the place is Ur, the city of Ur of Sumerians. So the excavations carried out in Ur also means that excavations are carried out in Babylonia. So when I mentioned that the archaeologists excavated the palace in Ur, and they discovered the tomb of Queen Puabi, we were talking about Ur, but in the same place much later, because Queen Puabi was many years before Nabonidus. Nabonidus was only serving as a king in 556 and 539 period. So much later. Perhaps some of the buildings were above the buildings of the time of Queen Puabi. But they were both found in the same area. The ruins of Queen Puabi and the ruins of Nabonidus, his palace. We'll see the picture of his palace. He was the last Babylonian king because there was a drought. People were hungry, they couldn't find any food, so the country just quickly disappeared. And they were so weak, and then it was conquered by Cyrus the Great, the important Persian emperor. This is the carving of Nabonidus. There's an interesting thing, I'll talk about it later on. This is found in Urfa, Şanlıurfa. And he was in Urfa many times. Actually, he was born in Urfa. His father was the governor of Urfa, Harran. And there is some kind of suspicion about the real nationality of Nabonidus. Some people think that he was from Harran. Not only he was born, but his grandparents were from Harran. We don't know, but most of the people assume that he was a Babylonian person. His father was the governor of Harran, and he was born there, and he grew up, and then he moved to Babylon. He moved back to Babylon. But I don't know the exact story, but most of the people think that he was not from people of Urfa. He was not born to a mother who was born also in Urfa. Now, there is another stele, which is in Istanbul Museum. This summarizes the religious activities of Nabonidus. Now, he was a king, but he was directly related to religion. I'll give you the details, what I mean when he was directly related to religion. Now, there are also various stories about how he became a king, because many historians say that he was not the son of the king of Babylonia. He was not a prince. He was the son of the governor of Harran, but his father was not the king. Therefore, there is a question how he became a king of Babylonia. There are some written documents written by him, and he's trying to explain how he became king, but legally. But there are some documents, there are some evidences that there was a coup against the king of Babylonia. And one story says that the king died somehow, and then his son, about 9 years old, became the king for a short time. And then somehow they found the boy, king who was a boy, killed. He was beaten to death. Somehow they just started to beat him with rocks, whatever, and then he died. And Nabonidus was a strong man in the army. Somehow they said, you will be the king, or he declared that he will be the king. But there is a mix-up in when we talk about kings, and for us, there were always fights in the families of the kings. They killed their father, they killed their brother, they killed their sister, whatever, to become the king. There was always problems. Hittites, Sumerians, Babylonians. So it's very normal, perhaps, that he may be the part of the cope who killed the boy king. Well, anyway, he became the king. When he became the king, he wanted to change the religion of the people. So he is one of the few kings whose name is mentioned in Torah, Tevrat, many times. Because he wanted to change the religion of the people. Now, he believed that the moon god, whose name is Sin, should be the main god of Babylonia. But the 99% of the people in Babylonia, they believed in sun god, whose name is Marduk. And also he is called Shamash. And of course, the priests in Babylonia who were working in the temples of the religion which accepted the main god, the sun god, as the main god, Marduk as the main god. So all of a sudden, if you say that to the priest and the people that Marduk is not the main god, from now on your new god is the moon god, of course, all the priests will be left out of job. So they all protested him. There was a turmoil against him, but he managed somehow. And now I don't know if I have it here. Okay. Now, when we talk about the sun god, Marduk, you will remember the story of Hammurabi receiving his code of laws from the god. That god is Shamash or Marduk. He is seated. This is the god, seated, Marduk. And this is Hammurabi receiving, supposedly, that's his story, of course, receiving the law of codes of Hammurabi from the. So usually when they have a carving, the god is shaped like a king, but just bigger king, and always seated. And the king is, of course, standing up. Now, according to Torah, Nabonidus, but he's mentioned as a mad king. So in many documents, Nabonidus is mentioned as a mad king. Torah really mentions him as a bad man, madman, crazy man, whatever, because, as I said, he was trying to change the religion of the people. Now, in Torah and some other written documents, Nabonidus declared to his people that when he was sleeping in his dream, the God came to him and he said, "Go to Haran and go and repair the moon god's sins." The temple named Ehulhul was the temple of moon god. He said, "Go to Haran and find the ruins of that temple," because the temple was ruined by Medes people. Medes bizim kitaplarda Metler diye geçer ya, Met grubu. They are the people from the northern Iran. Iranians were known as Medes people at that time. That's around 670. So Nabonidus lived around 500 BC. About 100 or more than 100 years ago, Medes came to Haran and they just ruined the temple of moon god Sin. So he says, God told me to go to Haran and find the ruins of the moon god temple and then repair it. he also wanted his people to find the old temples of Babylonians, because as centuries pass, some of the temples just tear down either because of old age or by the invaders of the country. When people come to invade the country, they usually ruin the temples. And he ordered his people in Babylonia to excavate various places where they suspect that a temple existed previously, so that he wanted to learn who or which king built the temple. Usually in those days, like even in Ottoman Empire, the kings built the temples or mosques or jamis. And then in old days, they used to have a foundation stone, temel taş, under the ground, a stone or a brick, and the name of the king who built that temple was written on that ground stone. So he said, let's try to find the ruins of those temples, and I want to learn, he said, which king built those temples. So that is the job of archaeologists today. So that's why we call him archaeologist, because he excavated old ruins of temples and then tried to learn the name of the kings. That's why we call him the first archaeologist. And he did that actually in Harran and also in Babylonia. Yeah. Among his works, he reached the foundation stone of a temple which was built by an Akkadian king, Naram-Sin. So he saw the name of the king himself on the foundation stone under the ground. He was happy, and he said that this foundation stone was not seen by any king for 3,500 years ago. I am the first king to see the foundation stone. But of course, in those days, they didn't know much about the timing of archaeological ruins. And they didn't know the difference between 500 years and 1,500 years. They were just estimating, roughly. So he made a mistake about 1,500 years, because that king lived around 2,254, and he maybe just 1,500 years before him, not 3,500 years, or not 3,205, but maybe 2,000 years. But anyway, so Nabonidus is considered to be, as I said, the first archaeologist, because he made many excavations, and he rebuilt the temples. And he wrote many documents related to his works on archaeology. Of course, he didn't use the word archaeology, it was used in those days, but rebuilding the old temples of the gods. So this is one of the clay cylinders, where the declaration of King Nabonidus exists. So there are many stories on this clay cylinder, which of course the kings, when they write something, they always make themselves to look very kind person and a person who made beautiful things, but of course they never mention about the bad things they did. Well, anyway, so this is one of the documents related to Nabonidus. So this cylinder and two others were also found by the archaeologists who found Queen Puabi's ruins, and they also found the Nabonidus's ruins. So this cylinder comes from the same area, Ur or Babylonia. This is another cylinder. of Nabonidus' other stories. He always tells how he became a king, how he was innocent, and how people liked him, how many beautiful things he did. He loved people, things like that. This is the third one. So, okay, now let's talk about the first museum in the world. Enigaldi Nanna was the daughter of King Nabonidus. So she was with her father when he was carrying out many excavations to find the old temples and when he repaired them. So during the excavations, you do not only find the ruins of the building, but you find some artifacts, some stone or clay materials. So she collected them all. And she created a museum just next to the palace of his father, and his father appointed her as the priestesses of the temple. So she was the head priestesses, rahibe. She was the top rahibe of the temple of Babylonian people. So she had a temple. So she kept all the artifacts or the historical materials in that temple. So that temple of Enigaldi Nanna was the first museum in the world. Now this is an imaginary painting of Enigaldi Nanna. Of course, it has nothing to do with her at all. But anyway, okay. Now, you remember the archaeologist Woolley, who discovered the ruins of Queen Puabi. Also, he was the same person because he was working in the same place. Who excavated the ruins of Enigaldi's museum. When he saw these objects, he was shocked because they were not from the same era of her father's kingship. Some were 2,000, belonged to 2,000 years ago, some were 1,000 years ago, 500 years before, and from various places, not from Ur or Babylonia. They were from various places of Mesopotamia. And then he said, this is not ordinary, these are not ordinary artifacts of the palace of Nabonidus, but they came from various places and they belong to various different centuries. And that was, so Woolley said that this place is the first museum in the world. So he was the first one who named the museum of Enigaldi as a museum. He says it's the earliest example of a museum. And she was so smart because when she put artifacts, a historical material on the display, he explained what that material was and where it came from and how old it was, in 3 different languages on a cylinder labels. Even our museums, they do not have three languages. It's funny. So this is the original cylinder, one of the original cylinders of Enigaldi's museum, and on the faces, the name of the object, where it was found, how old it was, were all explained in 3 different languages. In some European museums, they have triangles, prisms. You can, if you don't speak Turkish, you turn it to Turkish and you read it. They have 3 languages. Perhaps they heard the 3 languages from him. So this is archaeologist Leonard with another, Leonard Woolley with another archaeologist, Lawrence. And this is the museum of Enigaldi next to the palace. This is the ruins of the palace of Nabonidus. and some part of it was the temple, which was used as a museum by Anigaldi. Now, there is a museum in Iraq, and most of the historical materials that Anigaldi collected are now in Iraq, in this museum. Not only the small pieces, but also big ones. Now, this is a small piece from Anigaldi's museum, which was discovered by the British archaeologist, and it dates back to 2154, even though she was living in Babylonia around 500 BC. Now, this is in a museum in England, of course. Yeah, this slide is just about the discovery of Woolley. He was shocked when he saw that some of the artifacts were well organized and there were labels next to it. And at that moment he said, this is a museum. Now, in that museum they found many artifacts, as I mentioned before, dating back to 2100 BC down to 600 BC. And Woolley discovered that she had a statue in the museum of the king Shulgi of Ur, who ruled around 2058. And also he found that there was a mace with a stone head, topuz, yani taş, kafası taş olan bir topuz. And also, he was surprised to see the statue of the king Shulgi, which was restored by, definitely by Anigaldi or her workers. There was a statue which was partly broken, but he could easily see that it was repaired. So you don't repair a statue unless you are trying to display it in a museum. And in the museum also there was a boundary stele. In the old days, in order to warn the people where they are entering, just like our kilometer tags displays on the roads, we say Polatlı 50 kilometers or Temelli 20 kilometers. So they had steles or rock, which is written on the rock, warning you that you are about to enter another city. In fact, there is a cylindrical stone in front of the Archaeology Museum of Architectural Faculty. Have you seen the museum? There is a stone, something written on it. And it was found in around, next to Konya Yolu, someplace maybe about 20 kilometers from the campus. And it was a stele which mentioned that you are about to enter Ankara from Roman Empire. Tesadüfen bulmuştuk biz onu orada. Okuttuk hocalara, dediler ki bu Ankara'nın sınır taşı. Sınır taşı deniyor. Yani nerede olduğunu bil. Hani gidiyorsun da hani doğru yolda mısın, yanlış yolda mısın? Okay, this is a ziggurat where the temple of Sumerians, and they repaired it also. And she was praying. According to a story, she was praying in a ziggurat. This is the reconstruction of a ziggurat, which is the main shape of the temples of Sumerians. Evet. So that's the end of the course for the semester. Any questions about